Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the school parking lot, her worn combat boots scuffing against the cracked asphalt. At 17, she had already learned that being different meant being invisible to most people and a target to others. Her father's military gear bag hung loosely from her shoulder, containing the only things that made sense in her chaotic world: her shooting equipment and worn copies of military manuals. The other students rushed past her toward their cars, chattering about weekend parties and college applications. None of them noticed the quiet girl with calloused hands and sharp eyes who could outshoot most adults at the local range. Sarah had stopped trying to fit in months ago, when Jessica Crawford and her crew had made it clear that a girl who spent weekends at shooting competitions instead of the mall would never belong. "There goes G.I. Jane," Jessica whispered loudly enough for Sarah to hear, causing her group of followers to giggle. Maybe she should join the army since no college will want her. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. The sting of those words hit deeper than Jessica could have imagined. College applications sat unfinished on Sarah's desk at home, not because she lacked intelligence, but because her family couldn't afford the fees, let alone tuition. Her mother worked double shifts at the diner, and her father's disability checks from his military service barely covered their rent. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small town of Cedar Falls, where dreams seemed as rare as opportunities. Most kids here either left for bigger cities or stayed to work at the lumber mill. Sarah felt trapped between those two futures, belonging to neither. Her only escape came through the scope of a rifle, where everything else faded away except her, the target, and the perfect stillness between heartbeats. At home, their small house felt even smaller with the weight of unspoken disappointments. Her father, Marcus Mitchell, sat in his usual spot by the window, his injured leg propped up on a footstool. The IED explosion in Afghanistan had ended his military career and left him with chronic pain that no amount of medication could fully touch. He watched Sarah enter with eyes that held both pride and concern. "How was school today, kiddo?" he asked, though they both knew the answer would be the same as always. "Fine, Dad," Sarah replied, dropping her bag by the door. She had learned not to burden him with stories about Jessica's taunts or her teacher's lowered expectations. Marcus had enough battles of his own fighting with VA paperwork and insurance companies. Her mother, Linda, emerged from the kitchen wearing her diner uniform, her tired smile still managing to light up the room. "I left dinner in the fridge, sweetheart. I've got to cover the evening shift for Maria again." Sarah nodded, understanding the sacrifice. Every extra hour her mother worked meant a few more dollars toward keeping their heads above water. She watched her parents exchange a quick kiss, noting how her father's hand lingered on her mother's arm, as if trying to memorize the warmth of human connection. After her mother left, the house settled into its familiar evening rhythm. Sarah helped her father with his physical therapy exercises, their conversations flowing around topics that mattered: ballistics, wind calculations, breathing techniques. These discussions were the closest thing to normal their family had experienced since Marcus's injury. "Remember what I taught you about long-distance shooting?" Marcus said as they worked through his leg stretches. "It's not just about pulling the trigger. It's about becoming one with the rifle, understanding every variable that could affect your shot." Sarah nodded, absorbing every word. Her father had been a military sniper before his injury, and these evening lessons were precious gifts of knowledge that no school could provide. She understood the physics behind bullet trajectory better than most college students understood basic algebra. "The Barrett M107, Marcus continued, his eyes growing distant with memory. "Now that's a rifle that separates the pretenders from the professionals. 50 caliber rounds that can reach out and touch targets at distances most people can't even see clearly." The Barrett M107 had become something of a legend in Sarah's mind. She had read every technical manual she could find, watched countless videos online, and dreamed of the day she might actually fire such a powerful weapon. Her current rifle, a hand-me-down hunting rifle that her father had modified for precision shooting, felt like a toy in comparison. That evening, Sarah sat at her small desk, homework scattered around her like fallen leaves. Math problems blurred together as her mind wandered to the shooting competition scheduled for the following weekend. It was a local event, nothing prestigious, but it offered a small cash prize that could help with groceries. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake Henderson, one of the few classmates who didn't treat her like a pariah. Jake was captain of the school's rifle team, though their program was poorly funded and received little attention compared to football or basketball. Heard about the state military exhibition next month? They're having a civilian precision shooting demonstration. Thought you might be interested. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors about the exhibition but hadn't dared to believe she might actually attend. Events like that typically required equipment she couldn't afford and connections she didn't have. Yet something about Jake's message sparked a flame of possibility that she hadn't felt in months. She researched the exhibition online, discovering that it would feature current and former military personnel demonstrating various weapons and techniques. The civilian demonstration was open to qualified shooters, with prizes that could change someone's life, including a scholarship fund for military families. As Sarah read the requirements, her stomach sank. Participants needed to demonstrate proficiency with military-grade weapons, including the Barrett M107. She had never even touched such a rifle, let alone fired one. The entry fee alone was more than her family could spare. But as she stared at the computer screen, her father's words echoed in her memory. The Barrett M107 separates the pretenders from the professionals. Maybe it was time to find out which category she belonged to. The next morning brought another day of navigating the social minefield of high school. Sarah's teachers had long since relegated her to the category of students who would graduate and disappear, pursuing practical careers that didn't require ambition beyond their small town's borders. Her guidance counselor had suggested community college and trade school, practical choices that felt like giving up on dreams she had barely allowed herself to acknowledge. During lunch, Sarah sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at a peanut butter sandwich while reviewing ballistics charts. The numbers and equations made sense in a way that social hierarchies never would. Physics was honest. Bullet drop, wind drift, and muzzle velocity followed predictable patterns that didn't care about popularity or family income. Planning to shoot up the school? The voice belonged to Brett Morrison, a football player whose academic achievements were as limited as his empathy. Sarah looked up calmly, her eyes meeting his with the steady gaze she had learned from hours behind a rifle scope. Just studying physics, Brett. You might want to try it sometime. Brett's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Jake Henderson appeared at Sarah's table. Actually, Brett, Sarah's probably the best shot in the county. Maybe you should ask her to teach you something useful. The confrontation ended with Brett walking away muttering, but Jake's words stayed with Sarah throughout the afternoon. The best shot in the county. Was that really possible? She had won several local competitions, but her victories felt small compared to the vast world of professional marksmanship. After school, Sarah made her way to the local gun range, a converted barn on the outskirts of town where serious shooters gathered to practice. The range owner, Bill Carson, was a Vietnam veteran who had taken Sarah under his wing when she first started shooting competitively. His weathered face lit up with genuine warmth when he saw her approaching. Sarah, good to see you. I've got some new targets set up at 800 yards if you want to try pushing your limits today. 800 yards was farther than Sarah had ever attempted, but Bill's confidence in her abilities was infectious. She retrieved her rifle from its case, going through her pre-shooting ritual with practiced precision. Every movement was deliberate, every check systematic. As she settled into position, the familiar calm descended over her. The chatter of other shooters faded away, replaced by the rhythmic sound of her own breathing. Through the scope, the distant target seemed to float in a bubble of perfect clarity. The first shot missed by inches, surprising Sarah with how the increased distance affected her usual calculations. But rather than frustration, she felt excitement. This was a puzzle to be solved, a challenge that demanded every bit of skill and knowledge she had accumulated. Shot after shot, she adjusted for wind, elevation, and the subtle variations in her rifle's performance. By the end of the session, she was consistently hitting the target, her groupings tight enough to impress the experienced shooters who had gathered to watch. "Damn, girl," said Tom Bradley, a former Marine who rarely offered praise. "I've seen trained soldiers struggle with that distance. You've got natural talent that can't be taught." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride, but also something deeper, a growing realization that she possessed skills that could open doors beyond her small town's limited horizons. The state military exhibition suddenly seemed less like an impossible dream and more like a destination she might actually reach. That evening, she approached her father with a carefully rehearsed conversation about the exhibition. Marcus listened intently as she explained the opportunity, his expression shifting from interest to concern as she described the requirements and costs involved. The Barrett M107 isn't something you can just pick up and master overnight, Sarah. That rifle kicks like a mule and requires respect that comes from experience. I know, Dad. But Bill thinks he might be able to arrange for me to train with one. And Jake's father said he might sponsor my entry fee if I can prove I'm ready. Marcus studied his daughter's face, seeing determination that reminded him of his own younger self. This isn't about proving something to those kids at school, is it? Because their opinions don't matter in the real world. It's not about them, Sarah replied honestly. It's about finding out what I'm capable of. You always said that a person should push their limits to discover their true potential. The conversation continued late into the evening, with Marcus sharing stories of his own military training and the discipline required to master powerful weapons. He spoke of the responsibility that came with such skills and the importance of using them for something greater than personal glory. By the time Linda returned from her shift at the diner, father and daughter had reached an understanding. Sarah would train for the exhibition, but only if she maintained her grades and continued to help with family responsibilities. The pursuit of excellence couldn't come at the expense of the people who mattered most. As Sarah lay in bed that night, she stared at the ceiling and imagined herself at the state exhibition, surrounded by professional soldiers and skilled marksmen. The image both thrilled and terrified her, but underneath those emotions was something stronger, a growing conviction that she belonged in that world, regardless of what anyone else believed. The next few weeks would test every aspect of her commitment, from her physical endurance to her mental toughness. But for the first time in her life, Sarah Mitchell felt like she was moving toward something, instead of just trying to escape from everything that held her back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was filled with possibilities that stretched far beyond the borders of Cedar Falls. The Barrett M107 waited somewhere in her future, ready to separate the pretenders from the professionals. Sarah intended to prove which category she belonged to, one perfectly placed shot at a time. The morning air was crisp when Sarah arrived at the Grange 3 weeks before the state military exhibition. Bill Carson stood waiting beside a long black case that made her heart race with anticipation. She had dreamed of this moment for months, but seeing the Barrett M107 case in person felt surreal. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" Bill asked, his weathered hands resting on the case. "This rifle weighs 30 pounds and fires rounds that cost $20 each. One mistake can be expensive and dangerous." Sarah nodded, her mouth dry with nervous excitement. She had spent the previous weeks reading every manual and watching every instructional video she could find about the M107. Her notebook was filled with specifications, maintenance procedures, and firing techniques. But nothing had prepared her for the moment when Bill opened the case to reveal the massive rifle nestled in custom foam. The Barrett M107 was longer than her torso and wider than any weapon she had ever handled. Its matte black finish absorbed the morning light, giving it an almost predatory appearance. The scope mounted on top was larger than some rifles she had fired, and the muzzle brake at the end of the barrel looked capable of redirecting enough force to knock a person over. "50 caliber, semi-automatic, effective range over a mile," Bill recited like a prayer. "This particular rifle belongs to a friend who used it in Iraq. He's letting us borrow it because he believes in what you're trying to accomplish." Sarah reached out tentatively, her fingers trembling slightly as they made contact with the cold metal. The weight was immediately apparent, even just lifting one end of the rifle. This was a weapon designed for war, not for teenage girls from small towns with big dreams. "First lesson," Bill said, his tone becoming instructional. "Respect the weapon, and it will respect you. The M107 is unforgiving of mistakes, but it's also incredibly precise in the right hands. We're going to start with dry firing exercises before you even think about live ammunition." The next hour was spent learning the rifle's controls, from the safety mechanisms to the bolt operation. Sarah's hands, accustomed to her smaller hunting rifle, had to stretch to reach all the necessary components. Her shoulder ached from supporting the weapon's weight, and her arms trembled from the sustained effort. "This is harder than I expected," Sarah admitted during a break, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cool temperature. "Physical conditioning is part of precision shooting," Bill replied. You can't hit what you can't hold steady. We'll work on building your strength alongside your marksmanship skills. The training regimen Bill designed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Morning sessions focused on physical conditioning, push-ups, planks, and exercises specifically designed to strengthen the muscles used in long-distance shooting. Her afternoons were spent studying ballistics tables and weather patterns, learning to calculate the countless variables that affected a bullet's flight over extreme distances. Jake Henderson joined some of the training sessions, serving as a spotter and providing encouragement when Sarah's frustration mounted. His presence helped normalize the intensity of her preparation, making it feel less like an impossible quest and more like a challenging but achievable goal. "My dad asked around about you," Jake mentioned during one of their sessions. "Turns out several military guys in the area have been watching your progress at competitions. They're impressed by your consistency and your attitude." Sarah felt a flush of pride mixed with pressure. Having experienced soldiers notice her work was flattering, but it also raised expectations that felt almost overwhelming. She was no longer just a teenager trying to prove herself, she was representing something larger, though she wasn't entirely sure what. The first time Sarah fired the M107, the experience was both exhilarating and humbling. Despite all her preparation, the rifle's power caught her off guard. The muzzle blast was deafening even through her hearing protection, and the recoil felt like being punched by a professional boxer. Her first shot missed the target entirely, the bullet sailing somewhere into the hillside beyond the range. "That's normal," Bill assured her as she blinked away tears of frustration. "The M107 is a different beast entirely. Your body needs time to adapt to the forces involved." Shot after shot, Sarah gradually adjusted to the rifle's characteristics. Her shoulder developed bruises that turned purple and yellow, testament to the punishment she was absorbing in pursuit of proficiency. Her shooting journal filled with notes about sight adjustments, breathing techniques, and the subtle differences between firing the M107 and her familiar hunting rifle. At home, Sarah's training became a family affair. Her father helped with exercises to improve her core strength and stability, drawing on his own military experience to suggest modifications to her technique. Her mother provided extra nutrition to fuel the demanding physical regimen, often working longer hours to afford the protein-rich meals Sarah needed for recovery. "I'm proud of what you're doing," Linda told her daughter one evening as she massaged Sarah's aching shoulders. "But I worry about you putting so much pressure on yourself. You're still just 17, sweetheart." Sarah leaned into her mother's touch, grateful for the reminder that she was still a teenager despite the adult responsibilities she had assumed. The training was consuming more and more of her time and energy, leaving little room for typical high school experiences. She had stopped attending football games and school dances, activities that had never interested her much anyway. But the isolation was beginning to feel heavy. The social dynamics at school remained challenging, though some attitudes were beginning to shift. Word of Sarah's training had spread through the small community, generating reactions that ranged from admiration to skepticism. Some classmates began to view her with new respect, while others dismissed her efforts as a desperate attempt to gain attention. "I heard she's training with some kind of super rifle," Sarah overheard one student whisper in the hallway. "My brother says it's the same kind they use to blow up cars from a mile away." Such comments reminded Sarah that her world was expanding beyond the narrow confines of high school social structures. The skills she was developing had real-world applications that most of her classmates couldn't comprehend. She was learning to speak a language of precision and discipline that few people her age understood. 3 weeks into her M107 training, Sarah achieved her first consistent hits at 1,000 yards. The targets appeared as tiny dots through her scope, requiring calculations that accounted for bullet drop, wind drift, air pressure, and even the Earth's rotation. Each successful shot represented hours of study and practice, distilled into a single moment of perfect execution. "You're ready for the next phase," Bill announced after observing her performance. "We're going to simulate competition conditions, complete with time pressure and distractions." The simulated competition was eye-opening. Bill invited several local shooters to create a crowded, noisy environment similar to what Sarah would encounter at the state exhibition. With spectators commenting on her technique and other shooters firing simultaneously, she struggled to maintain the calm focus that seemed natural during solo practice sessions. Her first shots under simulated competition conditions were disappointing. missing targets she could hit consistently when alone. The pressure of performing in front of others revealed weaknesses in her mental preparation that technical training hadn't addressed. "Competition shooting is as much mental as physical," explained Tom Bradley, the former Marine who had become one of Sarah's informal mentors. "You need to develop tunnel vision that blocks out everything except you, the rifle, and the target." The mental aspect of training proved to be Sarah's greatest challenge. She had always been comfortable with solitude, but performing under scrutiny required a different kind of confidence. Bill introduced meditation techniques and visualization exercises, teaching her to create mental barriers against external pressure. "Imagine a bubble around your shooting position," he instructed. "Nothing outside that bubble can affect your shot. The rifle becomes an extension of your body, and the target is the only thing that exists in your world." Gradually, Sarah learned to maintain her concentration despite distractions. Her shooting scores improved under pressure, and her confidence grew with each successful session. The awkward teenager who had been dismissed by her classmates was transforming into a skilled marksman who commanded respect from experienced shooters. The transformation wasn't limited to her shooting abilities. Hours of physical conditioning had strengthened Sarah's body, while the mental discipline required for precision shooting had sharpened her focus in other areas. Her grades improved as she applied the same systematic approach to her studies that she used for marksmanship training. "You carry yourself differently now," her father observed one evening as they reviewed her shooting data. "You found something that gives you confidence in who you are." Marcus was right. Sarah no longer hunched her shoulders when walking through school hallways or avoided eye contact with classmates who had dismissed her. The knowledge that she possessed rare and valuable skills had created a foundation of self-respect that couldn't be shaken by teenage social dynamics. 2 weeks before the exhibition, Sarah achieved a milestone that surprised even Bill Carson. During a practice session with particularly challenging wind conditions, she managed to place 5 consecutive shots within a 6-inch grouping at 1,200 yards. The achievement represented shooting that would be impressive for a trained military sniper, let alone a teenager with less than 2 months of experience with the rifle. "I've been shooting for 40 years, Bill said, examining the target through binoculars. "And I've rarely seen natural talent like yours. You have gifts that can't be taught, Sarah. The question is what you're going to do with them." That question haunted Sarah as the exhibition approached. She had proven to herself and others that she could master the Barrett M107, but the larger implications of her abilities remained unclear. Was this just an interesting hobby, or was she discovering a path toward a future she had never considered possible? The answer came unexpectedly during a conversation with Jake's father, Robert Henderson. Robert was a successful businessman who had served in the Army Reserves and maintained connections with active military personnel. He had been following Sarah's progress and had news that would change everything. "I've been making some phone calls," Robert told Sarah and her parents during a meeting at their home. "There are people in the military who are very interested in your abilities. They're looking for candidates for a new precision shooting program, and your name has come up in several conversations." The room fell silent as the implications of Robert's words sank in. Sarah had been focused on proving herself at the state exhibition, but apparently her reputation was already spreading to circles she hadn't imagined reaching. "What kind of program?" Marcus asked, his military experience making him cautious about vague opportunities. "A scholarship program that combines college education with specialized military training," Robert explained. "It's designed for individuals with exceptional natural abilities who want to serve their country while developing their skills to the highest level." Sarah felt her heart racing. A scholarship program would solve her family's financial problems while providing access to training and equipment she had only dreamed about. But it would also mean committing to a military path that she hadn't seriously considered until that moment. "The exhibition is essentially an audition," Robert continued. "There will be military recruiters and program representatives watching all the civilian participants. Your performance could open doors that most people never get the chance to walk through." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about the crossroads she was approaching. The state exhibition had started as a way to prove herself and possibly win some prize money for her family. Now it represented the potential beginning of a completely different life, one filled with opportunities and responsibilities she was only beginning to understand. The Barrett M107 had indeed separated the pretenders from the professionals, but Sarah was still discovering which category she belonged to. The exhibition would provide the final test not just of her shooting abilities, but of her readiness to step into a world where precision and discipline weren't just personal goals, but matters of national importance. With less than 2 weeks remaining before the exhibition, Sarah's preparation entered its final phase. Every shot mattered, every adjustment counted, and every moment of doubt had to be overcome. She had come too far to settle for anything less than her best performance when it mattered most. The state fairgrounds had been transformed into a military showcase that stretched across several acres. Camouflage tents housed displays of modern weapons and equipment, while demonstration areas had been set up for various military specialties. The sound of helicopters overhead, mixed with the sharp crack of rifle fire, as visitors explored the different exhibits. Sarah stood at the civilian registration table, her hands trembling slightly as she filled out the paperwork for the precision shooting demonstration. Around her, other participants checked in, most of them middle-aged men with expensive custom rifles and decades of competitive shooting experience. She appeared to be the youngest participant by at least 15 years, a fact that wasn't lost on the registration volunteers. "Are you sure you're in the right place, honey?" asked the elderly woman behind the table. "The youth activities are over by the helicopter display." Sarah straightened her shoulders and met the woman's gaze directly. "I'm registered for the precision shooting demonstration. Sarah Mitchell." The woman checked her list twice before finding Sarah's name, her eyebrows rising with surprise. "Well, I'll be proud. You're the girl everyone's been talking about. Good luck, sweetheart. You're going to need it." The comment stung, but Sarah had learned to use doubt as motivation rather than discouragement. She collected her participant packet and made her way to the staging area where competitors were setting up their equipment. The variety of rifles on display was impressive. Custom bolt actions worth more than most people's cars, precision instruments crafted by master gunsmiths for specific purposes. Sarah's borrowed Barrett M107 looked utilitarian compared to some of the artistic pieces around her, but she had learned that function mattered more than appearance. Bill Carson helped her set up at the assigned position, his presence providing a calming influence as other competitors and spectators gathered nearby. "Remember everything we've practiced," Bill said quietly as he checked the rifle's zero. "This is just another day at the range, except with more people watching." But it wasn't just another day, and Sarah knew it. Military personnel moved through the crowd, some in uniform and others in civilian clothes, all carrying themselves with the distinctive bearing that marked professional soldiers. She recognized several faces from recruitment materials and military publications, people whose opinions could change the trajectory of her life. The shooting course was more challenging than anything Sarah had encountered during training. Targets were positioned at distances ranging from 800 to 400 yards, with shooting positions that tested different skills. Some shots required prone firing from stable positions, while others demanded accurate shooting from uncomfortable angles or awkward stances. "Competitors will have 4 hours to complete 20 shots," announced the range master, a retired Army colonel whose voice carried the authority of decades in uniform. "Each target will be scored for accuracy and time. Safety violations will result in immediate disqualification." Sarah studied the course layout through her spotting scope, mentally calculating the adjustments needed for each target. Wind conditions were variable, with gusts coming from different directions depending on the terrain features. She would need to read the environment carefully for each shot rather than relying on consistent conditions. The first competitor was a man in his 50s who owned a gun shop and had been shooting competitively for 30 years. His custom rifle was a work of art, with precision components that cost more than Sarah's family earned in several months. He moved through the course methodically, his shots precise and confident. Sarah watched his technique carefully, noting how he adjusted for wind conditions and managed his time between shots. Several of his rounds hit the center of their targets, drawing appreciative comments from the spectators and nods of approval from the military observers. Other competitors followed, each demonstrating different approaches to the challenges presented by the course. Some relied on expensive equipment and meticulous preparation, while others depended on experience and instinct developed through decades of shooting. All of them belonged to the adult world of serious competitive shooting, a community that Sarah was trying to enter despite her age and limited resources. "Mitchell, you're up," called the range master, consulting his clipboard. Sarah's legs felt unsteady as she approached the firing line, the Barrett M107 heavy in her arms. The crowd had grown larger as word spread about the teenage girl attempting to compete with military-grade equipment. Some spectators seemed genuinely interested in her performance, while others appeared to be waiting for entertainment in the form of spectacular failure. She settled into the first firing position, a stable prone stance at 800 yards. Through her scope, the target appeared crisp and clear, a familiar sight after weeks of intensive training. Her breathing steadied as she entered the focused state that had become second nature during practice sessions. The first shot surprised her with its perfection. The bullet struck the target's center ring, earning a perfect score that drew murmurs of approval from the crowd. Sarah felt a surge of confidence but forced herself to remain focused on the task ahead. The second target, positioned at 1,000 yards, required adjustment for a crosswind that hadn't been present during her first shot. Sarah took extra time to read the wind flags and vegetation movement, calculating the necessary compensation. Her shot struck slightly left of center, but still within the scoring rings. As she moved through the course, Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm that felt natural despite the pressure. Each target presented unique challenges, but her training had prepared her for the variables she encountered. The Barrett M107 performed flawlessly, its power and precision allowing her to engage targets at distances that would have been impossible with her familiar hunting rifle. The ninth target, positioned at 1,200 yards, tested Sarah's ability to shoot from an awkward position that simulated real-world tactical situations. She had to fire from behind a barrier that limited her movement options, requiring precise body positioning to achieve a stable shooting platform. The shot felt good as it broke, but wind conditions at the target location differed from her firing position. The bullet struck low and right, still scoring but not achieving the precision she had maintained throughout the earlier portion of the course. "Don't let one shot affect the next one," Bill called out quietly, providing the steady guidance that had become so important during her training. Sarah reset her focus and approached the 10th target with renewed concentration. This shot, at 1,100 yards, required her to demonstrate the mental toughness that separated successful precision shooters from those who merely possessed technical skills. The crowd had grown quiet, recognizing that something special was happening. Sarah's performance was exceeding expectations, not just for her age, but for any competitor. Military observers were taking notes and speaking in low voices among themselves, their attention focused entirely on the young woman behind the massive rifle. Target after target, Sarah continued to deliver accurate shots under pressure that would have overwhelmed many experienced shooters. Her scores remained consistently high, placing her among the top performers despite her relative inexperience with the equipment and the competitive environment. The 15th target presented the course's greatest challenge. A small steel plate at 1,400 yards, positioned in a location where wind conditions were particularly difficult to read. Several previous competitors had missed this target entirely, while others had managed only marginal hits. Sarah studied the target for several minutes, watching distant vegetation and using every technique she had learned for reading wind patterns. The calculations were complex, requiring her to account for variables that changed during the bullet's flight time over such an extreme distance. Her shot broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil familiar and manageable after weeks of intensive training. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's trace as it arced through the air, following a trajectory that seemed to take forever to complete. The steel target rang with a clear metallic ping that carried across the range, indicating a solid hit. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, recognizing the difficulty of the shot she had just accomplished. Several military observers exchanged meaningful glances, their interest in Sarah's abilities clearly elevated by her performance. "Outstanding shot," called the range master, his professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine admiration. "That's the kind of shooting we expect from our best military marksmen." The remaining 5 targets felt almost anticlimactic after the success at 1,400 yards, but Sarah maintained her focus and discipline throughout the remainder of the course. Her final shots continued the pattern of excellence she had established, resulting in a total score that surprised everyone, including herself. When the smoke cleared and scores were tallied, Sarah had achieved something remarkable. Her total placed her second overall among all competitors, beaten only by a former Army sniper who had represented the United States in international competitions. More importantly, her performance had exceeded the minimum standards for several military precision shooting programs by substantial margins. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the range master as he presented the results, "we've witnessed something extraordinary today. Sarah Mitchell, at 17 years old, has demonstrated shooting skills that would be exceptional for a trained military marksman with years of experience." The applause was genuine and enthusiastic, coming not just from spectators, but from military personnel who understood the significance of what they had observed. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the attention, but also deeply satisfied by the knowledge that she had proven herself under the most challenging circumstances she had ever faced. Colonel James Rodriguez, the military liaison for several specialized programs, approached Sarah as she was cleaning her rifle. His bearing commanded immediate respect, and his eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone accustomed to evaluating potential in others. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Colonel Rodriguez. I've been watching your performance today, and I'm impressed by what I've seen. Would you and your family have time to discuss some opportunities that might interest you?" Sarah felt her heart racing as she nodded agreement. The conversation she was about to have would determine whether her exhibition performance was the culmination of her shooting career or the beginning of something much larger. There are programs within the military that are specifically designed for individuals with your natural abilities, Colonel Rodriguez explained. Full scholarships for college education, combined with specialized training that would develop your skills to their maximum potential. The offer was everything Sarah had hoped for and more, but she also understood that accepting would mean committing to a path that would fundamentally change her life. The comfortable world of small-town competitions would be replaced by the demanding environment of military service and international-level competition. "What exactly would be expected of me?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Excellence," Colonel Rodriguez replied simply. "We would expect you to maintain the same level of dedication and performance that you've demonstrated today, but with access to equipment, training, and opportunities that are simply not available in the civilian world." As Sarah considered the colonel's words, she realized that the Barrett M107 had indeed separated the pretenders from the professionals. Her performance with the powerful rifle had opened doors to a future she had never imagined possible, but walking through those doors would require courage that went far beyond anything needed for precision shooting. The exhibition was ending, but Sarah's journey was just beginning. The targets she would face next would be measured not in yards but in years, and the precision required would extend far beyond the ability to place bullets exactly where she intended them to go. 2 years had passed since the state exhibition that changed everything for Sarah Mitchell. The scared teenager who had once been dismissed by classmates and teachers now stood at the Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning, preparing for the most important shot of her military career. The Barrett M107 in her hands was no longer borrowed equipment, but a precisely maintained tool that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Sarah's transformation had been remarkable but demanding. The military scholarship program had provided her with a full college education in engineering, while simultaneously training her as a precision marksman. Her days were divided between advanced mathematics classes and range time that pushed the boundaries of what was considered humanly possible in long-distance shooting. The woman behind the rifle bore little resemblance to the uncertain girl who had once worried about fitting in at Cedar Falls High School. Military training had strengthened her body and sharpened her mind, while constant exposure to challenging shooting scenarios had built confidence that radiated from her every movement. Her shooting jacket bore patches indicating achievements that most career soldiers never attained. "Mitchell, are you ready for the record attempt?" asked Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, the range supervisor whose own shooting credentials were legendary within military circles. Williams had been skeptical when a 19-year-old college student was assigned to her unit, but Sarah's performance had quickly converted doubt into respect. Sarah nodded, her pre-shot routine already begun. The official SEAL sniper record for the Barrett M107 stood at 2,515 yards, set by a veteran marksman with 15 years of combat experience. Today's attempt would be conducted under controlled conditions, with multiple witnesses and video documentation to ensure the legitimacy of any record that might be broken. The target was a steel plate positioned exactly 2,600 yards from Sarah's firing position, 80.5 yards beyond the existing record. Multiple rangefinders and surveying equipment had confirmed the distance, eliminating any possibility of error in measurements that could invalidate a successful shot. Environmental conditions were challenging but not impossible. Wind speed varied between 5 and 12 miles per hour, with directions that shifted subtly across the massive distance the bullet would travel. Air pressure and humidity readings had been recorded every 15 minutes for the past 3 hours, providing data for the complex calculations required for such an extreme shot. Weather update, called Sergeant First Class David Park, the team's meteorological specialist. Wind holding steady at 8 to 10 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature has stabilized at 72 degrees with 60% humidity. Sarah incorporated the environmental data into her mental calculations, a process that had become as automatic as breathing during her years of advanced training. The Barrett M107's ballistics were programmed into her mind with mathematical precision, allowing her to visualize the bullet's trajectory with remarkable accuracy. Colonel Rodriguez, the same officer who had recruited Sarah after the state exhibition, stood among the observers. His presence represented the military's investment in her development and their confidence in her abilities. Other spectators included fellow marksmen, training instructors, and officials responsible for maintaining shooting records. "Take your time, Mitchell," Colonel Rodriguez said quietly. "There's no pressure here except what you put on yourself." But Sarah understood the significance of what she was attempting. Breaking a record held by elite SEAL snipers would validate her place among the military's most skilled marksmen. It would also demonstrate that the faith placed in her abilities during recruitment had been justified by results that exceeded all expectations. She settled into the prone position that had become as comfortable as sitting in a favorite chair. The Barrett M107's weight distributed across her body in familiar patterns, while the scope's image provided crystal-clear resolution of the distant target. Through the lens, the steel plate appeared as a small gray rectangle wavering slightly in the heat shimmer that rose from the intervening terrain. Sarah's breathing settled into the rhythm that preceded her best shots. The controlled inhalation followed by slow, steady exhalation that ended in the natural pause where her body achieved perfect stillness. In that moment of suspension between breaths, when her heartbeat created the only movement in her shooting position, the rifle would discharge with mathematical precision. The first ranging shot struck the dirt approximately 10 yards short of the target, raising a small puff of dust that provided valuable information about wind conditions at the far end of the range. Sarah's spotter, Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, adjusted his observations based on the bullet's impact point. "Elevation looks good, but you're fighting a crosswind component that's stronger at distance," Chen reported through his spotting scope. "I'm seeing approximately 2 minutes of angle right wind deflection." Sarah made the necessary adjustment to her scope's windage setting, a minor correction that would translate to several feet of difference at 2,600 yards. The precision required for such extreme distances meant that tiny errors in calculation could result in complete misses of targets that appeared enormous at normal shooting ranges. The second shot was closer, but still missed the target by a narrow margin. The bullet struck the steel frame holding the target, producing a metallic clang that carried clearly across the range despite the enormous distance involved. The near miss demonstrated that Sarah's calculations were essentially correct, requiring only minute refinements to achieve perfect accuracy. "You're right there, Mitchell," encouraged Master Sergeant Williams. "Trust your training and let the rifle do its work." Sarah felt the familiar calm descending over her, the focused state of mind that had become her trademark during competition and training scenarios. External distractions faded away until only the rifle, target, and environmental conditions existed in her consciousness. The observers, pressure of the record attempt, and implications for her career were temporarily forgotten. Her third shot incorporated subtle adjustments based on the previous impacts and updated wind readings. As the Barrett M107 discharged, Sarah felt the perfect balance of all variables that indicated an ideal shot. The rifle's recoil was absorbed by her body positioning, while the muzzle blast and mechanical action cycled with the smooth precision of a perfectly maintained weapon. Through her scope, Sarah tracked the bullet's flight path across the enormous distance separating her position from the target. The projectile's journey took several seconds, during which wind conditions could theoretically change enough to affect the outcome. Time seemed suspended as everyone waited for the conclusion of the bullet's long arc through the air. The metallic ring of bullet-striking steel echoed across the range with unmistakable clarity. The target shuddered from the impact, swinging on its mounting hardware before settling back into position. Spotters with high-powered optics immediately began confirming the hit. while range officials prepared to document the successful shot. Confirmed hit on target at 2,600 yards, announced Master Sergeant Williams, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask her excitement. That's a new record for the Barrett M107, beating the previous mark by 80 to 5 yards. The range erupted in applause and congratulations from military personnel who understood the significance of what they had witnessed. Sarah had not only broken an existing record, but had done so with a margin that demonstrated clear superiority rather than marginal improvement. Her achievement would be difficult for future marksmen to match, let alone exceed. Colonel Rodriguez approached Sarah with an expression of satisfaction and pride. Outstanding shooting, Sergeant Mitchell. You've just earned a place in military history that few people will ever approach. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the achievement, but also by the realization of how far she had traveled from her origins in Cedar Falls. The girl who had been told to get lost by classmates and teachers had just broken a record held by some of the military's most elite warriors. Her journey from outcast teenager to record-holding marksman seemed almost impossible to believe. "How does it feel to hold the official record?" asked a military journalist who was documenting the event for publication in professional shooting magazines. "Humbling," Sarah replied honestly. "I know how much work went into reaching this point, and I also know how many people supported me along the way. This record belongs to everyone who believed in my potential when I didn't believe in it myself." The celebration continued as word of the record spread throughout the military shooting community. Sarah received congratulations from fellow marksmen, training instructors, and officers who recognized the exceptional nature of her achievement. Her phone filled with messages from people who had followed her journey from the state exhibition to this moment of triumph. Among the messages was one from Bill Carson, the range owner who had provided Sarah's first opportunity to train with the Barrett M107. His simple text carried more emotional weight than all the official congratulations combined. "Knew you had it in you from the beginning. Your old man would be proud." The reference to her father brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Marcus Mitchell had passed away during her first year of military training, succumbing to complications from his combat injuries before he could witness his daughter's rise to prominence. His early lessons in marksmanship and mental discipline had provided the foundation for everything she had accomplished. That evening, Sarah called her mother to share news of the record. Linda Mitchell had followed every step of her daughter's military career with a mixture of pride and concern, supporting Sarah's choices while worrying about the dangerous aspects of her specialized training. "I saw the news reports online," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "They're calling you the best shot in the military. I still can't believe my little girl accomplished something so amazing." "I'm not little anymore, Mom," Sarah replied with gentle humor. "But I'm still your daughter, and I still remember everything you and Dad taught me about working hard and never giving up." The conversation continued late into the evening, covering topics that ranged from technical details of the record shot to family memories that had shaped Sarah's character. Despite her military achievements and national recognition, the connection to her small-town roots remained strong and important. Over the following weeks, Sarah's record generated attention that extended far beyond military circles. Civilian shooting publications featured detailed articles about her technique and training methods. Television interviews provided opportunities to share her story with audiences who had never considered the precision and skill required for extreme long-distance marksmanship. The attention was flattering but also challenging for someone who had learned to value the quiet focus required for precision shooting. Sarah found herself navigating the demands of public recognition while maintaining the training regimen necessary to preserve her skills at their peak level. "Fame can be a distraction," warned Master Sergeant Williams during one of their training sessions. "Your record is already in the books, but staying at this level requires the same dedication that got you here in the first place." The warning proved prophetic as Sarah struggled to balance her new celebrity status with the demanding requirements of continued military service. Speaking engagements and media requests competed with range time and physical conditioning for her attention. The discipline that had carried her to record-breaking performance was tested by temptations that had never existed during her earlier development. But the same mental toughness that had enabled a dismissed teenager to master the Barrett M107 served Sarah well as she navigated the challenges of success. She established boundaries that protected her training time while still fulfilling her obligations as a role model for young people interested in marksmanship sports. 6 months after breaking the record, Sarah received orders for her first deployment overseas. Her specialized skills would be utilized in situations where extreme precision could make the difference between mission success and failure. The training ranges and controlled conditions she had known throughout her military career would be replaced by real-world scenarios, with consequences that extended far beyond personal achievement. As she prepared for deployment, Sarah reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this point. The Barrett M107 had indeed separated pretenders from professionals, revealing abilities she had never suspected she possessed. More importantly, it had provided a path away from the limitations that had seemed to define her future in Cedar Falls. The teenager who had been told to get lost had found herself instead, discovering that rejection and doubt could be transformed into motivation for achievements that seemed impossible. Her story had become proof that potential exists in unexpected places, waiting for the right combination of opportunity, dedication, and courage to reveal itself. The SEAL sniper record was just the beginning. Sarah's name was now permanently entered in military history, but her mission was far from complete. The same precision and discipline that had enabled her to break records would soon be tested in situations where accuracy meant protecting the lives of fellow service members and accomplishing objectives that could not be measured in yards or fractions of inches. She had proven that a small-town girl could master the most demanding aspects of military marksmanship. Now she would discover whether those skills could make a difference in the larger mission of serving something greater than personal achievement. The Barrett M107 had brought her this far, where it would take her next remained to be written in the precise language of perfectly placed shots when they mattered most.